What up guys, Otterpop here. Welcome to South Park Season 9 reactions and kind of reviews. I say that because I actually stopped doing reviews before the halfway mark of Season 9. I don't know, I think I did it because it ended up just being a little bit too much effort, and I think it was around this time that I started thinking about switching over to Patreon exclusively for new reactions, but I hadn't yet because, you know, Season 10 was still available for pretty much anybody, I think. Something along those lines. But yeah, I think only the first 6 episodes of Season 9 actually have reviews, which will be present in this video. But any reviews for the rest of the Season 9 episodes don't even exist. I never recorded anything like that. I don't even remember if I prepped for those. So, but there are some reviews, but all the reactions for Season 9 are going to be down in the description below, and currently Season 11 is going to be available publicly for everybody shortly. Season 12 is still not. It is still a Patreon exclusive thing. And I'm pretty sure that all of Season 12, yeah, all of Season 12 has been reacted to. I'm currently working on Season 13 right now for Patreon. So yes, the reviews for the 6 episodes of Season 9 are going to be right here, but all the reactions are going to be down in the description below, so go ahead and follow those, and, you know, check out any of the other links that are down in the description as well. So, yeah, enjoy that. Peace. Wow, it's actually been a little while since I've done one of these. What up guys, Otterpop here. South Park reactions and reviews are back. Sorry they took so long, but no need to worry because we are back with a new season of South Park, and this time it's going to be Season 9. And of course by this point, many of you should know by now that the link to the reaction is going to be down in the description below, along with links to my Patreon as well as my Discord. And of course links to the profiles of the artists who have helped me with this particular season as well as the last season. That's right, Chloe and Moon are still helping me with designs of new sprites as well as thumbnails and backgrounds. So go ahead and check out all those links. Now on to the actual review of this particular episode, South Park Season 9, Episode 1, and oh boy, does South Park start the season interesting. Now when I say interesting and South Park in the same sentence or group of sentences, there's usually a reason for it. But in this case, there are some rather negative connotations for that. Because this particular episode is called Mr. Garrison's Fancy New Thing. I'm not actually going to say that word. I don't want to get demonetized. But yes, Garrison's Fancy New Thing. Everybody's changing in South Park these days. Mr. Garrison decides to become a woman and certainly acts like a cliche one. Kyle wants to be on a basketball team and will do anything for a negroplasty? Even Gerald gets turned into a weird human-dolphin hybrid. The whole episode is just weird. Now, unfortunately, beforehand, a number of people were providing me with quote-unquote spoilers. Now, some of you may not exactly know what spoilers refers to. Here's what it means. If it has anything whatsoever to do with a future episode, whether it's information about it, or the characters, or even your opinions on it, don't tell me. Cause seriously guys, this is how blind reactions work so well, especially for me and for South Park, which is incredibly popular and it's really difficult to avoid, and you guys sometimes don't help. And this is something I made sure to note of in my reaction as well. I practically talked a little bit about this particular subject in the beginning of the reaction, before I even started it, right at the beginning of the video. But alas, it did not stop people from warning me about this particular episode. There were some people that even suggested that I shouldn't watch it at all. Now I will admit, in creating this script, I realized there wasn't a whole lot that I could talk about. That doesn't mean there isn't a little bit to say, of course, but, you know, it's just not much, and I think people can agree it's for good reason. That being said, I wasn't about to be super biased or impartial. I was keen on judging every single episode, good or bad, entertaining or boring, shocking or cliche. I have no regrets in trusting my own judgment, but after watching, I think I've come to realize that everyone may have been right about this episode. Again, still satisfied that I was at least trying not to be biased and watching every single episode, but people may have been right about this particular one. The most prominent thing that I noticed throughout the entirety of the episode was that everyone was so out of character, Mr. Garrison being a prime example. I mean, come on, he's accepted his homosexuality on numerous occasions in previous episodes. He seemed genuinely interested and committed in the relationship he shared with Mr. Slave, and vice versa. It is an adorable relationship, or rather it was an adorable relationship. Garrison's mannerism pretty much across the entirety of the episode, as soon as he gets the surgery at least, are almost all things I find to be very stereotypical. You know, being a woman myself, something which I mentioned during the reaction. Shouting gleefully about tampons and being a woman. Rambling on about prices, shopping, clothing, and sales. I hate doing that, by the way. Talking incessantly in the bathroom with other women present. Some people might be surprised to know that this happens less often than one might think. I mean, it still happens, but not as often as people would think. Unless they're close friends or family, this kind of chatter seldom happens, and even if it does, it's not really a lot. Certainly not with strangers. And generally speaking, that's far more personality-based than gender-based in terms of bathroom chatter. Garrison also appeared to like to strike a pose whenever possible. Generally speaking, there was constant chatter with Garrison. Garrison was also complaining frequently about men. And again, I find a lot of these quote-unquote womanly characteristics to be extremely stereotypical, more obvious than plenty of the smaller subtle stereotypes that have been seen in previous episodes. All in all, it just felt way more obvious than it should be for what I consider to be a normal South Park episode. And yes, he may have been exhibiting some common stereotypical woman behaviors or whatever, but I also call into question his actual desire to be a woman if he seems to have much more interest in having periods and abortions. These are things even most women wish they did not experience. Again, I can speak from experience. And then he had the audacity to mention to Mr. Slave about struggling and suffering and not being happy with the way he was. And yes, he certainly had some troubles up until accepting his homosexuality, and I argue that he seemed quite happy to be who he was afterward, most notably seen during any scenes with him and Mr. Slave. Oh yeah, almost forgot to mention a little bit of a side note. As I suspected, the clips used during the operation at the beginning of the episode were indeed clips from real male-to-female sex change operations. Initially, there was about a minute or so footage that was suggested to be used. Stone and Parker questioned this idea in many later years, but Comedy Central said no, so only a small portion of it was used. I'd call that a relief. Second side note, Garrison also went to a hospital in Trinidad for the operation and is an actual Colorado location where, when Stone and Parker were younger that is, was one of the only places in the state where you could get that kind of operation. That part was actually a little bit fascinating to learn about. But wow, Garrison was acting so out of character throughout this entire episode, it was incredibly bothersome. And he wasn't the only one. Kyle was another big part of the problem. Parker explained during his Season 9 commentary that when he was younger he wanted to be part of the Denver Broncos. It's a football team, in case anybody doesn't know. Just because. He just wanted to be part of the team just because. But he felt he didn't have the right body for it, mostly since he wasn't black. His words, not mine. So that's kind of what inspired the idea for Kyle's operation. But Kyle has on numerous occasions had his individuality tested and has very often remained firm on retaining it, which is something I absolutely have supported multiple times in previous episodes. But this episode almost seemed to ignore that notable characteristic of Kyle's completely. Not to mention that Kyle's love of basketball was something that seemed to come out of nowhere and seemed to exist only to explain his desire to get a negroplasty, which itself may have been intended to be nothing but sheer shock value. For obvious reasons, Gerald was yet another character who seemed very much out of character in this episode. His love of dolphins feel like it was just put in the episode for him to have a human-to-dolphin hybrid operation again for the sheer shock value, like what happened with Kyle's negroplasty. Unless I possibly missed his love for dolphins in a previous episode, which is entirely possible. And like Kyle, Gerald has often remained firm on retaining individuality and making relatively reasonable decisions, up until this episode it is. Gerald also had no hesitation in getting any kind of consent from or having any conversation with Sheila, which is also extremely out of character for him. Gerald even denied Kyle's negroplasty request early on, only for him to do a complete 180 later on in the episode. If you people don't yet know how I feel about 180s, I don't like it. I don't care how much of an ability you think you have in allowing 180s to happen with characters, it does not work. It never works. The out of character characters also wasn't the only problem with this episode. Granted, many South Park episodes have tackled all different kinds of issues in the past as far as I've seen. Sometimes they handle it okay. Sometimes they handle it rather well. This was not one of those instances. It was something I picked up on a little bit in the episode, but I was just still struggling to figure out everything with this particular episode, but I thought that there was a little bit of almost transphobia in this particular episode. Prime example, Gerald mentioned that Sheila was passing on transgender progressive ideas to Kyle and implied through tone that what she did was a bad thing. And then Garrison thinks she isn't actually a woman and considers herself just to have a mutilated male part rather than actual woman parts and says, as a result, the doctor turned her into a freak, which seems a little bit transphobic to me. Garrison saying she'd rather have woman parts than be an FAG is highly offensive, not to mention very out of character for Garrison. The doctor mentions at one point how there's nothing crazy about changing changing the external features of an individual to reflect how they feel about themselves. I mean, I guess that's true, but this episode went about exploring that idea in a very different way than it probably should have. In case some of you were not aware, I've actually personally known some transgender people, and I do greatly respect those in the LGBT community, and as I am kind of one myself and know many people, friend and family alike, who also find a place in that community, South Park has tackled all kinds of issues and controversies up until this point, so I'm not surprised that this kind of came up because I feel like it would have come up eventually anyways. But I don't think that the subject was approached appropriately, unlike many of the other instances of the show doing the same with various other subjects. So kind of in general conclusion, is this the worst episode? From what I've seen so far, I'd have to say yes, but there is still a lot more to see from this show. Don't get me wrong, the episode did have its moments from very rare time to time, but overall it wasn't great from my perspective, but most other episodes seem good or at least decent, and so this episode serving as a low point only means you can go up from there. With all the faults that this episode produced, I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Stone and Parker. Stone and Parker initially went into the season having literally no ideas, and nearly all of the episodes of the season were them just winging it. I think they had like 2 ideas, which was this episode and another episode, I don't exactly know for sure, but most of the time they were just kind of winging it for this season. There is a claim too that Parker has admitted that the episode caused him a lot of stress afterwards and even made him come close to quitting the show. Now I'm not sure how true this is, I did try and look it up a little bit, but the claim's validity is entirely possible based on the results of this episode and how I feel about it compared to many of the other episodes, and I'm sure how the fans felt about the episode, even nowadays. So far, this seems like the lowest that the show could go, and from what I've heard, it's the lowest point in the season for sure, which means that all I can do is look up from here. So that is what I will do. For anyone else who might be doing blind reactions to South Park, I think it would be fair if you did skip this one, but if you want a true South Park experience and want to experience every single episode, good and bad, then watch it at your own peril, because it is certainly not as good as plenty of the other episodes I've seen in the past. And that is going to be my final word on this particular episode, so I guess welcome to Season 9? Good day and good night. Anyways, that is all that I have for this particular video, so thank you all for watching, check out all of those links in the description, and as usual, until the next video guys, check you laters. What up guys, Otterpop here, and welcome to the review for South Park Season 9, Episode 2, Die Hippie Die? Gosh, I don't know the titles of any of these episodes before I watch them, and then as soon as I find out what the title is, sometimes I'm like, okay, that makes sense, and other times, like this particular episode, I think to myself, okay. Now before I get started with the review, don't forget about all the links in the description down below. Obviously, there's a link to stuff like my Patreon, as well as my Discord. I'm always appreciative of all kinds of support for those kinds of things. And of course, the link to the actual reaction is down in the description as well as links to the profiles of the artists who have helped me with the thumbnails and the sprites. Serious thanks to Moon and Chloe for helping me with that. And now that that's finished up, let's start off with a quick recap of the episode. Hippies begin showing up in harmless droves that spiral out of control as they put together a music festival with South Park caught in the fray. Eventually, and reluctantly, the adults of the town turned to Eric Cartman for a solution. Unbelievable, I just had to say that. Obviously, when I was watching this episode initially, I didn't have too much to commentate on, mostly because I was trying to figure out what in the frock was going on. Unsurprisingly, there were lots of cultural references and parodies throughout the entirety of the episode. Most of them I didn't get, I actually had to research a bunch of them. Some of them were pretty small and insignificant, but at least there were a couple of references, a big one in particular, that I did get. Again, the episode was full of references. Apparently the episode was somewhat of a parody of disaster movies like Armageddon, hence the crazy drill plan towards the end of the episode. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, just watch the reaction. But I was a little bit more focused on other things and references. I didn't mention it because I was trying to figure out the episode, but I remember immediately thinking that Cartman's exterminator suit reminded me of a knockoff Ghostbusters outfit. Seriously, I remember wanting to say it right as he got the suit on and showed the suit, but then there were other things happening in the episode and didn't get a chance to say it, but I wanted to say it, but I didn't get a chance. Especially towards the end of the episode, there were also plenty of random metal references. You know, the music genre. For one thing, Cartman refers to Slayer, the music he played at the end of the episode to rid the town of all the hippies, as a death metal band, but is actually classified as a thrash metal band. I personally don't know too much of the difference. I only barely know the difference. I'm not really a fan of metal at all. I did, however, learn that the thrash metal band genre thing association is associated with bands such as Metallica and Megadeth, which I've heard of, but that's pretty much about it. Again, metal is not really my genre of music. Same with country, actually. And there were a few other random metal references sprinkled throughout the episode,
episode, but the one that I just mentioned is the one that I understood the most, kinda sorta. But ho dang can I give myself a big ol' pat on the back because I did recognize the most obvious piece of satire in the entire episode, and that was the Woodstock Music Festival in 1969. So during my reaction, I thought it was a longer event as opposed to just a 4-day gathering, but at least I knew some things, so again, big ol' pat on the back for myself. Basically for Woodstock, 500,000 people attended the music festival over a period of 4 days. Same number of people as was stated in the episode. Ideas of peace, music, love, and freedom flourished at Woodstock and has become an iconic segment in recent history. Well, American history for sure. It was also full of unforgettable musical sequences and the rise of a number of musicians. Artists such as Jimi Hendrix, The Who, The Grateful Dead, Santana, Janis Joplin, and yes, there were plenty of other ones as well, but those are definitely ones that I recognize. But as I also mentioned during my reaction, there are also a lot of failures of Woodstock that just aren't talked about very much. Cars would clog the roadways and parking lots, resorting to many people abandoning vehicles and walking for miles just to attend the music festival. Not to mention there were very few bathrooms, probably about one for every 800 or so people attending. Again, 500,000, so yeah. Not to mention many square miles of ground were littered with garbage, sewage, mud, and unhygienic people. Ailments such as heat stroke were numerous amongst the attendees. The lack of organization caused food shortages, monetary losses, and even needless or accidental deaths. Even kids weren't spared from the terrible prospect of having no choice in receiving food or drinks potentially laced with all manner of drugs and concoctions. And the cleanup after the festival concluded was an utter mess. So sure, there's a lot of great talk about what happened during that music festival and how so many musicians and artists really got their name boosted up from that festival. But man, if it didn't cause problems. And again, I was incredibly happy and surprised to know that I actually understood a reference and knew a little bit of information about that reference. And this is something that happened in 1969. My parents weren't even born yet. How did I know so much about this? I couldn't tell you, honestly. But I actually knew about it for once, and I could share and impart some of my knowledge onto you. Most of the information turned out to be pretty correct. So there you have it. I know a thing or two. Ha! Other than the pretty obvious references and parodies, there wasn't really a whole lot much more going on throughout the entirety of the episode. There was another interesting reference I did learn about. There was a reference to the hippies referring to corporations as Eichmanns. I initially had no idea what that hippie guy said, until I did some research, that is. But Eichmanns itself references Otto Adolf Eichmann, who was a major proponent of the Holocaust, meaning the hippies basically compared corporations and big businesses to Holocaust Nazis. That seems a little dark, but South Park has done worse with comparisons, honestly. I stated in the episode, I was incredibly surprised at how sensible the adults seemed to be during the entirety of the episode, up until in the end when they realized they quote-unquote needed Cartman's help. Unbelievable, they needed Cartman's help of all characters. Pfft. Oh, and by the way, I was also relieved to see that miraculously the mayor survived shooting herself in the head. I had no idea how, but I won't dwell on it. Cartoon logic. And of course, I was also glad to see that Stan, Kyle, and Kenny were rash by the end of the episode, only because they could not figure out why the festival needed to happen, but they still had a reasonably intelligent thought process behind it, I guess. And I couldn't believe Cartman had actually saved the day, even if he was a little bit of a D-bag by the end of it. One of the only things that slightly confused me was how Sharon and Randy apparently had been a part of Woodstock as teens or college students in 1969, meaning that present day they would have been in their 40s or 50s. So either this is a continuity error or a simple joke I didn't understand, and honestly, either explanation is entirely possible. So yeah, all in all, not too much to say about this particular episode. I mean, there's still a little bit to talk about, and again, big ol' pat on the back for actually understanding a reference that was well before my time, before my parents' time even. So yeah, I think at that point, I'm probably gonna go ahead and end this review here because I really don't have much else to say. Heck, even based on some of the research I did, there wasn't really a whole lot to say about this particular episode. Not that that's a bad thing. I mean, it was certainly better than the first episode in my opinion, for all kinds of reasons. Regardless, I will be ending it there, so thank you so much for watching this review, and I hope you enjoyed the reaction, and please do check out as many of those links in the description as you possibly can, and as usual, until the next video guys, check you laters. Lo and behold, it is that time. Time for another review of a South Park episode. And this right here is going to be the review for South Park Season 9, Episode 3, Wing. Now before I get really started with the review, you all know the drill. Down in the description below are all the links that you will possibly need. Links to the reaction itself, to my Patreon and my Discord server, and of course links to the profiles of the artists who have been helping me with stuff like, you know, South Park video thumbnails and sprites and stuff. And speaking of my patrons, I swear I keep forgetting to do a legitimate shout out. And this will be a little bit delayed, but I'm gonna go ahead and give a quick shout out to all my current patrons. That would be Slackety, Popcorn73, Adam Gunther, and Joseph Bauer. Thank you guys so much for your continued or renewed or recent support. Whoops. That kind of support really does mean a lot to me. And any future support would also be welcome as well. For example, some patrons may get things like early access and sneak peeks to video and art projects. Some may get the option to commission specific types of art pieces from me, or some even behind the scenes information. You never know, so thank you for that. Anyways, where was I? Yes, let's start off with a quick recap of this episode, shall we? The four boys create a talent agency in the hopes of making a little money with little effort. They manage to get Token for a little bit until he leaves, and then they get Mr. Liu Kim's wife Wing smuggled in from China. And it kinda leads to a crazy misunderstanding between the boys and the Chinese mafia. Let's get one little quick thing out of the way, shall we? Stereotypes. Obviously, as with previous episodes, any Asian characters don't have eyes, just squinted eye lines. I mean, it's an obvious stereotype, but it's very noticeable in this particular episode due to all the Chinese characters shown prominently. And all of the quote-unquote Chinese spoken in the episode is just gibberish, as I might have expected. Not to mention the accents of the Chinese characters in this episode is also obviously stereotypical, with Mr. Liu Kim's accent being the most prominent. But come on, these stereotypes are just kind of typical of South Park episodes at this point, at least as far as I've recognized. Definitely the other big thing of this episode has to relate to talent agencies and quote-unquote property. A big part of when I'm talking about that is Token's initial big break. First off, Token is an incredible singer, is what I would say normally, if it was actually the voice actor himself who provided the singing. But Stone and Parker acquired the rights to You'll Never Find Another Love Like Mine by Lou Rawls, who is a well-known R&B, soul, and jazz artist who was actually alive at the time the episode aired. Sadly, he is not any longer. But literally all they did was speed up the song as they do for the character voice acting, and Stone and Parker thought it sounded just how like Token would sing. The voice actor for Token, Adrian Black, he cannot sing. At least, that's what my research told me. And Token initially signed with the boys' talent agency because they wanted to take advantage of him. And later on, a group called Creative Artist Agency basically kind of does the same thing. Fun fact, Creative Artist Agency is a real and dominant agency from LA. But of course, it all leads up to a very obvious moment at the very end of the episode with Stan making a whole big speech about Creative Artist Agency and talent agencies and people and property and whatnot. After the fight between the boys and the Chinese mafia, Stan makes note of how both are basically trying to own the life of a single person. Token initially was kind of the basic idea, but eventually it became Wing, by treating them almost as a piece of property for their own reasons, albeit very different ones, but still. And the episode basically equates talent agencies to that of like slave acquirers and traders, an idea which is supported by many plot points throughout the episode. The boys initially took advantage of Token's voice to gain some money of their own through little effort. They used him. Token basically became a waiter by the end of the episode because Creative Artist Agency took advantage of him and now he has no money to get home. The boys took advantage of Wing as soon as they heard about a potential cash prize that is not even a guarantee, but they don't focus on that because of their own greed. They care about the chance and the risk and the prospect of actually getting a little bit of money, not the risk itself. And the Chinese mafia have every intention of getting money from Wing and Mr. Liu Kim since they paid to help smuggle her out of China. That one is a little bit less so to the point since it's basically repaying a debt, though they still think they own her life in a way because of that. And shockingly, Cartman is the only one who disagrees, which I immediately knew would happen before it even happened. But at least everyone else is sane and agrees not to exploit people any longer as exploitation in any form, since that can often be seen as dirty or immoral, or both. So I normally would say, cool lesson bro, but I really don't think that any of these characters are going to be remembering these lessons for a long time. Last but not least, the major topic that I wanted to discuss for this episode, Wing herself. I'll admit, when I initially saw in the intro sequence that there was a special guest named Wing, I was thinking to myself, who in the heck is that? But, as evidenced by the end of the episode, Wing was a real singer whose audio recordings were used for the characters singing during the episode. I mean, she technically still is a real singer. As far as I understand, she's still releasing music from time to time. Cool. But basically, the conception for this episode started as Stone and Parker being told to check out something called wingmusic.com or something like that. I don't think it's exactly that, but it's something similar. Wing had released covers of AC/DC songs in 2003 alongside many other cover songs. And the more they thought about it, the more they thought it was either a super sweet, like awesome joke or a super sweet not joke. But Stone and Parker continued to listen to her music, especially when frustration hit them. They contacted Wing asking for her permission to use some of her covers in their episode, and she agreed only as long as she approved the character design, which she apparently liked. And awesome enough, Wing did get a slight boost in sales and popularity as a result of the episode. She even sent a letter to Stone and Parker thanking them for it. Oh, that's so sweet. Still don't really know any more about Wing, but I guess I know a slight bit more. At least now I know exactly who she is, because again, I first saw the episode intro and I had absolutely no idea who the frick this person was. And of course, yeah, that's just kind of the major stuff. But if you're familiar enough with these reviews, you know that there are some miscellaneous things that I'm going to talk about. It's not much, but you know, a couple little things here and there. First off, Sylvester Stallone in this episode, I wasn't sure whether to laugh or not. His speech impediment was so heavily mocked in the episode. It was so bad he needed a translator at all times. I even made immediate note of it during the reaction. Speaking of Stallone, another fun little detail I learned about, kind of in regards to him, is when Stallone asked Wing to sing at his son's wedding, Who Let the Dogs Out is played out for a moment. Apparently, in the Latin American dub, Gasolina by Daddy Yankee was played during that episode, instead of Who Let the Dogs Out. And yes, I'm actually familiar with both of those songs. Gasolina. I couldn't help it. There are some minor references to the movie Scarface in the episode, which I did vaguely notice, but I know very little about the movie, so I'm honestly just gonna leave it at that. There are some references, they existed, couldn't really define them in particular. And one last miscellaneous thing I want to mention, but Kenny actually dies for the first time in a while, and it actually affects Kyle for once as he gives a quick, heartfelt speech. It was so glorious. He does later confirm the death to Cartman and Stan, the latter of whom says his usual line. It was hilarious to hear it once again for the first time in so many episodes. They killed Kenny! You bastards! So good, so funny. I was so happy to hear it again for the first time in a long time. Anyways, that is all that I have to say about this particular episode. There was little bits here and there, but nothing earth-shattering. I feel like that's been pretty typical of the season 9 episodes. So far, a lot of them have been kinda meh, but I've still got many more episodes to see, so we shall see. Anyways, I'm going to go ahead and end it there. Don't forget to check out all of the links down in the description below. So thank you all for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this review as well as the reaction, and as usual, until the next video, guys, check you laters! What up, guys? Otterpop here, and welcome to the review for South Park Season 9, Episode 4, Best Friends Forever. Now first, I want to say a couple of quick things. I don't know how quick they'll be, but I'll try and make it as quick as I possibly can. First off, I want to apologize for what happened with the camera audio in the reaction. There was nothing I could do, and I realized too late, and by the time I realized, I'm like, okay, well, I'm gonna have to do a crazy bunch of edits, so that's what I did. Speaking of reactions, there are all kinds of links down in the description below, which includes a link to the reaction. Again, I tried to lessen the scratchiness of the camera audio as much as I possibly could, as well as links to my Discord server, and of course to my Patreon, which I am always accepting support for. And speaking of Patreon, let's go ahead and give a quick shout out to the patrons, because I haven't done that in a little bit, and I need to. Big shout out to my Otterpups first tier, Gigi, Adam Grunther, and Slackety, who get rewards such as early access to all the South Park content, as well as some other games and reactions from time to time. Shout out to my second tier Otterling, Icarus Crown, who gets early access to even more content, including games, reactions, and compilations, as well as some sneak peeks and blurbs for stuff like my writing, my novels, as well as my artwork. And of course, huge shout out to my 3-tier Sea Otters, Joseph Hour and Popcorn73, who get early access to basically everything, access to things like a newsletter, as well as a potential monthly commission. Now, I know I haven't talked about the patron rewards in a while, so I figured I'd kind of briefly mention it, even if a lot of people don't necessarily watch the review, which is okay. Alright, now that I got all the formalities out of the way, let's get on to the actual episode, which, as we all know at this point, starts with a recap. Kenny gets a new PlayStation Portable, which makes Cartman insanely jealous, and gets obsessed with the game Heaven and Hell. When he dies and ends up in a vegetative state, angels try to kill his body so he can help Heaven defeat the massive Hell army, while those alive argue about Kenny's state, turning it into a public spectacle. Biggest thing I feel like I should start out with are the cultural references. First off, I want to give myself a big pat on the back for recognizing some of the references of the episode. The whole Keanu Reeves thing confused me at first until I remembered Constantine, and surprisingly enough, this was only part of the reference. I feel like I should have gotten this maybe a little bit, but Reeves has portrayed a savior character in Constantine, yes, but has also done the same in The Matrix, The Devil's Advocate, and Little Buddha. The last one being the only one I haven't really seen anything of. And by the way, if anytime anything I'm saying confuses you, just watch the reaction. It'll make more sense. Another cultural reference relates to the fact that I was initially joking about comparing Satan to Sauron, but in Satan's first appearance in the episode, it was kind of my first thought. I should have known it was a Lord of the Rings reference, and the references only continued to build. By the way, I know I said Sauron over multiple occasions in the episode when I should have said Saruman technically, and I don't know how in the world I got those two confused, because I love Lord of the Rings. I did actually do a little bit of research to see how the timing worked, and Lord of the Rings did conclude a little over a year before the episode aired. Not as close of a timeline as I thought it would have been, but still not bad. But yes, on to a crap ton of Lord of the Rings references that I recognized as soon as I realized that there was an obvious Lord of the Rings reference. At one point I commented on Satan's army and how they looked more like demons and less like people as they have appeared in the past, hinting further that the army were orcs and Uruk-hai references. The army and Satan's initial battle cry reminded me of Saruman's speech as the massive Isengard army army of 10,000 prepared to attack Helm's Deep. Satan's advisor was kind of reminiscent of a combination of Darth Sidious from Star Wars and Grima Wormtongue from Lord of the Rings. I didn't say it technically, but I do remember definitely thinking about it. Not to mention, Satan consults an orb while a battle is commencing, just as Saruman does to talk with Sauron. And during the final battle, one of the angels comments on the battle being 10 times bigger than the Lord of the Rings movies. This was the very obvious hint that I needed to let me know that the Lord of the Rings references weren't just my speculation, but intentionally placed. And yes, it took me nearly an entire episode and an obvious reference for me to understand. I am not often the best at immediately analyzing or recognizing cultural references. As a side note, am I being such a nerd specifying all these references? I did it before, and I didn't care. And now, I still don't care if I do it. And now that I've gotten the fun little cultural references out of the way, let's talk about a little bit more of a serious, real-life reference that I did not recognize at all. And the reference is to an individual named Terry Chavo. I think I'm pronouncing that right. I could not be, but I think I am. A lot of you probably have never even heard of this individual, and honestly, I hadn't either until I ended up doing a crap ton of research, more than I usually do. Cultural references were overflowing with the Heaven versus Hell plot, but Kenny's vegetative state was itself a reference of a real-life event. In 1990, at age 26, a woman named Terry Chavo went into cardiac arrest, the underlying cause still unknown to this day. She was resuscitated, but as a result, she suffered from a condition known as hypoxic encephalopathy. Sounds like a lot of syllables, but it's basically brain damage as a result of oxygen deprivation for an extended period of time, and it resulted in a severely compromised neurological state. She was able to breathe on her own and only needed a feeding tube for nutrition and hydration, though a lot of brain functions, including her speech capabilities, were severely limited. By 1993, Terry's husband Michael and Terry's parents came into disagreement on how to care for her. Her parents insisted on therapy and rehab, but Michael insisted on letting her pass on. Michael did eventually claim that Terry had a verbal will that stated she would not want life support if disabled for life, confirmed by Michael's brother and sister-in-law. Hearings and petitions went on for a few years after 2000, though eventually the Supreme Court got involved. Terry's life support was removed March 18th of 2005, and she passed away on March 31st, less than a day after this episode was aired. So for 15 years, she was basically in this state. In an anonymous poll, a vast majority of people supported keeping a person alive in Terry's state, but in 3 informed polls, at least half the voters supported the decision to disconnect Terry's life support. Many disagreed on the terminology used in said polls. Not to mention that many medical professionals stated that Terry was not in a persistent vegetative state, and many believe she could have benefited from care and therapy. It's not exact, but some of these circumstances might be sounding familiar because a lot of it is similar to what happens in the episode with Kenny, albeit in a much more ridiculous way. There is one more subject that I do want to touch on that might be a little bit iffy for some people, but I think I am going to talk about it anyways, and it's something I mentioned in the reaction relating to moral dilemmas. Again, I mentioned this a great deal in my reaction, and I will mention it again. I am firm in the belief that if I'm in a vegetative state or comatose or whatever similar kind of state, and there is nothing that can be done to improve my condition, I'd say that this video alone can be used as evidence that I do not want to stay alive. And of course, that being said, if there are ways to improve my condition, then yes, do what you can to keep me alive and help me improve. I mean what I say. Moral dilemmas like this are really difficult to pick apart, to the point where sometimes there is no right or wrong answer. In Terry's case, something different could have been done since professionals continued in their belief that therapy and rehab would have helped her, even though Michael denied this aid after July of 1991. And I do have a little bit of experience with this, although the circumstances are arguably different. Years ago, my grandmother was diagnosed with a condition called PSP, which stands for Progressive Supranuclear Palsy. She was diagnosed when I was young, though I don't exactly remember when, but basically it's a rare neurodegenerative condition that affects movement, balance, eye movement, swallowing, etc., due to the continuous damage of certain nerve cell clusters that control many movements. And this doesn't even account for the mental effects and tolls that this disease can take, as this disease continuously worsens over time, hence progressive. By the time I started middle school and started to really remember anything in general, she was already in a wheelchair and could barely speak or eat on her own. My family and I visited my grandmother in the hospital in summer of 2009, as a decision was made to take her to another hospital where she would live out the last days of her life. She was on some kind of life support due to the severity that PSP had taken on her body by that point. And even though she couldn't speak, I still remember watching her cry as she was wheeled out for the last time. And my family and I were no different as we all said our goodbyes. And then she kind of passed only a couple of weeks later. In case anyone is wondering, there's currently no treatment for this disease, though occasional research has been worked on from what I've seen. My grandmother's quality in life had dropped significantly in her last few months. I knew her well enough and heard the stories to know that she was feisty, independent, intelligent, and passionate. She could barely communicate with other people, but we all knew that it was time, and that if there was no improvement, it almost seemed silly for her to stay. She knew it too, I'm absolutely certain of that. But in some cases, people might not know, as was perhaps the case with Terry, though it's difficult to say for certain. So my general thought is this: if someone's quality of life is so low or continuously degrading to the point where one's condition cannot be improved, I feel like there's little reason to keep them alive. And that seems kind of harsh. But will it be sad? Yes. And trust me when I say that I know a thing or two about that, and it will be tough. But imagine yourself in the same position as your loved one. I loved my grandmother very much. I even share her name, and I still wear the watch that belonged to her. But I also know she and many others did not want her to suffer and remain on life support with a condition she could never recover from. Dilemmas are hard, and they do need to be carefully considered. But these thoughts that I've mentioned up to this point are truly what I believe. And just so people know, I was crying even as I was writing the script, and I'm starting to cry already, so I'm probably going to stop that here. Well, I suppose I could say a quick little miscellaneous thing that I'll just kind of briefly mention, but this episode was the second time that Kenny's died this season, and it's 2 episodes in a row. And while the whole "they killed Kenny, you bastards" joke wasn't technically stated since Kenny was alone when he died, it was referenced on a couple of random occasions. There are a couple of other tiny things, but they're not as much worth mentioning. I'm already emotionally drained from this review, so I'll probably just end it here. Again, if I got a little bit touchy or iffy with any of these subjects, you can feel free to let me know, but I at least wanted to get my opinion out there. It could be controversial, maybe people could agree with it, I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, that's how I feel about it. So, I'm gonna stop it here, I'm gonna end it here, and again, sorry for the audio. I'm not entirely sure what's gonna happen with episode 5, I'll probably explain in a later community poster video or something like that, but I'll explain that later. So, thank you all for watching, apologies for the camera audio for the reaction, but I hope you enjoyed it nonetheless, and as usual, until the next video guys, check you laters. What up guys, Otterpop here. I am sorry it is taking me so long with these reviews for South Park, but I just got behind on a whole lot of projects and stuff. But these reviews are finally coming back, and that does mean that you now get to see some more research and some more opinions from me, and you can finally comment on these videos, so let's go ahead and get started. Obviously, real quick, a big shout out to the artists who have been helping me with these reviews, at least in terms of the backgrounds and the thumbnails and the sprites and whatnot. Seriously, thank you so much to both Chloe and Moon. Their links will be down in the description, at least the links for their profiles. Same thing for my Discord server as well as my Patreon. I'm always looking for new members of the community or new supporters, such and such. Anyways, let's get on with it, shall we? Let's discuss South Park Season 9, Episode 5, The Losing Edge. Quick recap of the episode. The South Park kids are playing baseball, but they find it so boring that they want nothing more than to lose. But so does every other team, apparently. Somehow South Park still keeps winning, and the players will do anything to prevent winning the state championship. Meanwhile, Rainey keeps getting drunk and into fights with other parents, but he hasn't yet met his biggest challenge. In the episode, he meets his biggest challenge during the episode, and it's kind of weird and funny at the same time. I think the biggest, most obvious topic is sports for this episode. Notably, baseball. While watching the episode, I made note of the fact that the episode wasn't terribly interesting to me as I don't like baseball much. And it turns out Stone and Parker don't really like baseball either. And just so you guys know, my sport is definitely football, or soccer as Americans know it. The original idea for the episode came from the fact that Stone and Parker thought the boys looked pretty cute in baseball uniforms. I mean, they kinda do, but they've had some cooler and or cuter outfits. Apparently though, some of the baseball animations during the episode were tricky to do, especially in the last match where the Denver team was creative and had expertise in losing, and so a different set of rules was created regarding animating certain movements. I mean, luckily there was the Randy v. Bat Dad Challenger side plot to help with lessening the animation constraints, but still. The positions the kids were playing on the field seemed to be legitimate ones, though I'm no baseball expert. Whether they were the most logical positions for each kid, I have no idea. Seriously, I'm not an expert. I don't know how certain strengths for certain positions work. That said, it was interesting that Stan was chosen as the pitcher for the team, and he seemed to be pretty good at it, even able to differentiate throwing a ball from a strike. I couldn't do that. I can't throw anything to save my life, let alone a baseball at a certain velocity or curvature, whatever baseball terms they are. Interesting little fun fact for those that live outside of Colorado, the stadium that appears at the end of the episode for the final baseball match, Coors Field, is a real location in Denver, as is expected of many Colorado locations across the show. And Coors Field is the home to the Colorado Rockies, the state baseball team, a field I have actually been to. It was kind of against my will, but semantics. And on that note, all the towns where the boys competed in previous matches are also real towns. I've been to Greeley, I've heard of Pueblo and Conifer, but I've never been there, and I live in Fort Collins. It was unlikely the initial point of the episode, but a connection I made during the reaction related to the parents living through their kids via sporting events and or competitions, as many of the parents seem to do in shows such as Dance Moms and Toddlers and Tiaras, again, which I mentioned directly in the reaction. I call those two shows out in particular because I find both of them to be incredibly ridiculous, as they in a sense glorify children in an unnecessary way with their parents, the mothers in particular, spending thousands of dollars and allowing their emotions to run wild when it comes to even the pettiest of arguments. This felt apparent to me as the parents seemed to like living through their kids when it came to baseball, Randy in particular, without even wondering if their kids wanted to do these games and events in the first place. They all seemed to have their own interests at heart, the parents did anyways, which is what a lot of those TLC programs seem to show very often as well. Randy even went so far as to constantly fight parents of opposing team players to the point where he would get bloodied and bruised and beaten, further cementing the idea of me comparing the parents of South Park in this episode to that of the ridiculous parents in the shows I mentioned earlier. That being said, Sharon appeared to be the most logical and just wanted to enjoy watching her kid play, which I very much appreciated and found myself to be on her side throughout a majority of the episode. And that's all I've basically got to say sports-wise, but there were a couple of cultural references kind of thrown around in the episode as well. For one thing, there were a number of references to the Rocky movie franchise. I figured eventually that there was some kind of movie reference, I just didn't know what exactly. And mostly that's because I really only know of the movie, but I haven't watched it. It's not my kind of entertainment. Most sports stuff in general isn't. Sorry not sorry, but sports dramas are just a snooze fest for me. Anyways, in regards to Rocky, there were songs from various Rocky movie soundtracks that were briefly played throughout the episode. Some of the effects and similar lines were also present across the various Rocky movies in the episode, such as the heartbeat and camera jitter effect from when Randy was struck down by Bat Dad later on in the episode. Bat Dad in general exists almost as a sort of amalgamation between Batman and other antagonists of the Rocky movies. My mind amusingly at first went to Bat Dad and Family, a dad and a wife named Jen, a son named Ben, and a few other daughters, which is a YouTube channel where a dad in a Batman mask makes vines. He's funny. And those are the major Rocky references that I can get out of the way. But the episode itself also services as a general spoof of sports films similar to the season 6 episode Aspen, except turned on its head since despite South Park trying to lose, they end up playing against multiple teams and winning every single time. There are a few other minor cultural references, but the others didn't ring a bell at all. I at least mentioned the main Rocky references, which was probably the most important topic. Interestingly enough, I didn't really come across a whole lot of any other miscellaneous little topics that I could talk about. Mostly it was just some, sports drama, spoofs, baseball related stuff, and a couple of Rocky references here and there, but overall, not an episode that terribly amused me, but like many other South Park episodes, it definitely had its moments. I did laugh and groan on a number of occasions, but would I watch it again? Probably not. Mostly because of the baseball aspect, because again, baseball is not my sport. Now if we're talking soccer or football, then I might have something to talk about, but obviously this is not either one of those, so no, there's nothing to talk about. At least not from my end. Anyways, that is all that I have to say for this particular episode. Again, I'm so sorry that the reviews took as long as they did, but they are coming back slowly but surely, and I don't exactly know when season 10 is going to be coming back in terms of reviews, but we'll have to see what happens. Anyways, thank you all for watching this, and now you guys finally get to comment to me your thoughts and opinions on this episode, along with the future reviews that come out. I hope you guys enjoyed the reaction as well as the review, which the reaction is going to be linked down in the description below as per usual for these reviews. And as usual, until the next video guys, check you laters. What up guys, Otterpop here with another review for another South Park episode. This one is going to be a review for South Park Season 9, Episode 6, The Death of Eric Cartman. And oh boy do I have some things to say for this particular episode. But first, let's just briefly mention all the links down in the description below, which is going to be for my Patreon. I'm always welcoming support. My Discord server, which I'm always accepting new community members. As long as you stay positive, have good vibes. And of course, links to the profiles of the artists who've been helping me for things like the thumbnails and the sprites for these particular reviews and animatics. So thank you guys so much to both Chloe and Moon. But you guys don't care about that. You care about the episode. Yes, it starts with a recap. We all know this by now. After Cartman is an asshole one too many times to Kyle and Stan and Kenny, they give him the silent treatment. But as a result, Cartman believes he's a ghost tethered to the earth. Through the impressionable Butters, who thinks he is being haunted, Cartman goes on a quest to right his wrongs so he can ascend to heaven. Let's first talk about the cultural references, shall we? I know, let's start with the obvious one. When Butters hides in the cabinet talking about seeing dead people, even I knew that was a direct reference to what I now know is The Sixth Sense. Also, it was not with Bill Murray, but it was with Bruce Willis. I'm very familiar with both actors, but somehow I still got them confused. Don't judge me. And there were so many references from that movie in this particular episode. The boy in the movie is often told he is delusional, much like how Butters was told this frequently by his parents, at least in this episode. I could believe it could happen in other episodes, but I'm just referring to this episode in particular. The psychologist in the movie convinces the boy to communicate with the dead and help their spirits, somewhat like how Cartman convinces Butters to help his spirit ascend, since no one else can apparently see Cartman. And of course, the very twist at the end of the movie relates to how the psychologist was actually dead the whole time. Sorry, I maybe should have said spoilers, but I'm pretty sure everybody knows this by now. Only this time it was reversed in Cartman's situation, even though it was a twist ending for him and Butters only. And by the way, I did not know this was the ending of the movie until I did the research. That's how unfamiliar and uncaring I generally am with movies like this, but I feel like everybody knows at this point anyways. And believe it or not, there's actually something pretty interesting to talk about, and that's South Park references. Yes, you heard me right. Even if brief, there were so many references to previous episodes in this single 22-minute episode alone. The kindergarten teacher, Miss Claridge, Scott Tenorman, Sally Struthers, and the Special Olympics staff make brief cameos as they were all major characters across various episodes previous. There are also plot references to various episodes, convincing a woman to get an abortion for stem cells from Kenny Dies, exterminating the Jews from Passion of the Jew, and various other plots related to the previously mentioned characters. There are also a whole bunch of other bad deeds on the scroll related to plots from episodes such as Casa Bonita, Best Friends Forever, Die Hippie Die, Freak Strike, and others. There are also apparently references to Cartman crapping in the principal's hearse on numerous occasions and breaking someone's fence, neither of which have been seen in the show as far as I'm aware. But are we really surprised by these actions? This is Cartman we're talking about. I don't want to go too much further into the South Park references because there were a whole bunch from characters to plots and whatnot. There's actually a much bigger topic that I really want to hone in on, something that fascinated me so much throughout this entire episode. Generally speaking, it relates to the personality spectrum. That sounds a little confusing, so let me explain. I already mentioned that this was probably my favorite episode of the season thus far, due to the sole fact that the episode primarily featured both Butters and Cartman. Many people have mentioned these episodes tend to lead to some fun plots and outcomes, and it's not hard to see why. I mentioned during the reaction that Cartman and Butters are on completely opposite sides of what I refer to as the personality spectrum. Definitions of the spectrum can be a little bit different from one person to another, but there is no question that Cartman and Butters, a racist, selfish, egotistical dick, versus an optimistic, naive, gentle soul, are completely opposite of one another, which is why the episode works so well. The idea of opposites attracting or forced to work together is a fascinating concept that entertains even those who don't think about complex concept often when it comes to writing and film. It's such a cool concept that I myself work with sometimes in my writing, where I'll put two or more very different characters in a scenario where they have to work together and their capabilities or relationships or beliefs are tested because they're so different from one another. And the same thing is true for seeing Cartman and Butters quote-unquote working together. The general idea of Cartman even asking anyone, let alone Butters, who he practically despises, for help at all is also an interesting concept for his character, since he so rarely asks for help and instead often whines, demands, blackmails. Yes, he did eventually say what he would to haunt Butters if Butters didn't help him, but Cartman did seem to genuinely want his help as time went on. Butters being such a pure soul even works for this episode. Butters does still genuinely consider Cartman as a sort of friend and is willing to help just about anyone in need, as he is very impressionable, which is often why Cartman takes advantage of him as he so often does. In this case, Cartman only took advantage of Butters due to a misunderstanding, thinking Butters was the only one who could see him as a ghost, as opposed to previous episodes where Cartman will typically target Butters for plots or teasing, so this was a little bit of a nice change of pace. Hope all of that made sense, but if it didn't, just know that the idea of opposites attracting and those kinds of characters working together in an episode or a movie, or whether it's serialized or not, it is a very fascinating thing to see, and I can definitely see why a lot of people regard the Butters and Cartman episodes to be some of their favorites. Honestly, I could go into so much more detail relating to these characters' interactions and the interesting nature of their relationship, but probably won't, because then I might start going overboard with details and characters and concepts, and this is about South Park. This is not about my writing habits and my interests when it comes to writing characters and stories and scripts and whatnot. So let's just jump straight into the miscellaneous stuff. The idea for the episode came from two different instances. Parker was on vacation in Tasmania apparently when he came up with the idea of the boys ignoring Cartman into thinking he was a ghost and only Butters acknowledging him. But Parker still knew that it hinged on Cartman having to do something super horrible for that to even happen in the first place. The staff had a script meeting and ate some KFC at one point, with one person mentioning how terrible it would be if someone stole all the skins, and an episode was fully formed. Even the toilet being brought out in the box, an idea that Stone and Parker loved, was still plot relevant, which they've still stated to this day that it was a cool concept and a funny line when Cartman was talking about sitting on the toilet reading comics. It was perfect that Cartman was chosen as a villain, since it fits with his character so well. The subsequent scenes and parts of the episode seem to flow really naturally afterwards as a result. And on a slightly random note, speaking of KFC and the skins and the chicken, whatever it is, I still don't understand the chicken skin eating part, but my tastes are particular, so perhaps I never will. You can all enjoy your chicken skins, I'll just roast some for myself in the oven, just as is. And that is all that I have to say for this particular episode. Again, links to everything that you need to know for my channel or this particular episode are going to be down in the description below, so go ahead and check out as many of those as you possibly can. Thank you all for watching, I hope you guys enjoyed this review as well as the reaction associated with it, and as usual, until the next video guys, check you laters.